the heretic in the modern secular nation state has been replaced by the ethnic minority. Very often these heretics they didn't have theological differences. They were mostly, especially in Europe, they were protesting against the structural injustice that was emerging there, and therefore they're cut down. Henry VIII and Elizabeth all persecuted Catholics because they were traitors to the state.
But why were they conceived of as traitors to the state?
Because the state was developing sovereign powers. And in the before the early modern period, the ruling class expected to have a different religion from the masses.
Yes, but it still doesn't get you round the fact that their only traitorous action is to believe something different.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It really is not. Most people
to owe their allegiance, as it were, to a different authority, that's worrying.
Let's have a look at the Sunni-Shia thing. That's not about doctrine at all. There's virtually no theological difference between the Sunni and the Shia. It begins as a profound political dispute as to who should lead the Muslim Ummah.
It's about lineage, isn't it? And
it's not just about lineage, it's about justice. And you have the complication that the Muslims were developing an empire. An empire was considered, strange as it may seem to us, to have been the best way of keeping the peace, because it meant that you have a supreme power that is able to hold warring aristocracies in check. And the Muslims had to do this, but this was utterly against the egalitarianism of the Quran. And so there were people, not just Sufis too, philosophers too, all protesting against this. And the Shia is a piety of protest, of disciplined protest against the injustice of mainstream Muslim society.
You make a very good case, I think, that if you're to make the case that religion is inherently violent, you have to selectively quote, because every single scriptural tradition will have a contradiction.
We are violent creatures.
We are violent creatures.
Therefore, our scriptures are violent.
Can I just ask you something about that distinction between, as it were, the moral and ethical components of all the major religions, and the elements that repeatedly in history cause violence and cause violent conflict, and it's supernatural belief. I wondered, from your knowledge of history, has there ever been a violent doctrinal dispute over what it means to be generous to the poor, say?
Well, actually, most of the early heretics, as I mentioned in the book, in Europe, were protesting against the aristocracy, who were at that point creating a full-blown empire.
Yes,
and then the Buddhists and the Confucians are very much about the golden rule. And they are creating, throughout a major theme in this book, has been the constant attempt to create alternatives to the violence of the state in the Buddhist Sangha, deliberately designed in many ways to sort of challenge the aggressive ethos of the court. Yoga is very much about getting rid of the aggression, and then in the mind, the egotistic me-first drive that makes us love fighting and combating, even verbally. And then and then the Buddha sends them out to work for the good and welfare of humanity. The Prophet Muhammad, the Quran is an outcry against the structural injustice that is emerging in capitalist Mecca. So. And my favorite story, and I told it to you the morning, is Ashoka, a 3rd century emperor, BCE, in India, who was a cruel man. He came to power by killing 2 of his brothers. But he accompanied the army when it was putting down a rebellious city, and he was appalled by the violence that he saw. He was horrified by seeing all these peasants being carted off away from their families to work land elsewhere in the empire. And he put up throughout his domains inscriptions on huge rock faces and massive cylindrical pillars that were uncovered in the 19th century, calling out for justice, for kindness to the poor, for tolerance, for recognizing that all sects were equally valid, all teachers must be listened to, not even those deemed heretical by the Brahmins. And he is going to create clinics for the poor. He is going to put up shade trees for the refreshment of animals and humans alike, but he can never disband his army. And he cannot send back, repatriate all those peasants that he's uprooted because they are essential to the agrarian economy. Now, this is the dilemma of civilization, and that's why these people say scornfully, well, you know, these people, like Buddhists, they were never able to succeed. But they kept up this alternative vision, this alternative outcry, and that's what we must do now in our secular world. Create mythologies, just as they did in the best of the scriptures, right from ancient Mesopotamia, that made the people aware, told stories and myths that made people aware of the profound injustice and violence that was being done to the poor and the peasants.
Can I ask why you think the mythology is necessary, rather than just the golden rule?
The golden rule is absolutely fine. I think if we could just all do that, and in whatever we did, and any walk of life that we happen to find ourselves in, all day and every day, not just when we feel like it. You know, that's my good deed for the day. No, all day and every day. That's what Confucius said. Then I think we'd have a peaceful world. And if
but the thing about the golden rule is the golden rule will never license an act of violence. A belief in a supernatural God can and has done repeatedly.
But we have a very, very primitive view in the modern world of what we mean by the supernatural. To be honest, I mean, Thomas Aquinas and Meister Eckhart would have been turning in their graves if they could hear the way we speak about a supernatural God. This is, again, one of the unique things that we developed with our scientific theory.
Again, wouldn't that be precisely one of the arraignments against religion? Is that, of course, there would be no problem if we were all theology scholars.
But that's why you need mythology. Because a myth, you see, this is one of the words that has been absolutely degraded in our modern ethos. A myth is something that isn't true, we say. A politician, if asked, accused of a peccadillo in his past life, will say, oh, it's a myth, it didn't happen. In fact, a myth, and I've written a whole book on this, a myth...
I'm not going to quarrel with you, your definition of myth.
A myth is, it tells a story of something that in some sense happened once, but which also happens all the time. It is uncovering a timeless truth that goes beneath everyday perceptions, but that lies at the heart of the reality as we see it, but does it in a guise that makes it accessible to people. Furthermore, a myth makes absolutely no sense unless it is put into practice. It's a program for action. So when you read the myths of Greek and Rome, for example, it's not going to hit the solar plexus. But when a myth is made alive, brought alive, say in a ritual, or is in an ethical practice that is incarnated in a person's life, then you discover the truth of the myth. But it's no good looking at these myths and saying, well, this doesn't work. A myth is a call for practical action. And unless you do it, you don't get it.
Could we phrase this slightly differently then, in a way we can probably both agree, which is the problem isn't religion, it's religious people. Or rather, to make it, as it were, completely uncontentious, the problem is people who are absolutely certain that they are right.
Well, there are plenty of secular politicians, or
of course,
even
I
secular
was expanding the definition to bring them in.
Who think they're absolutely right. I think the problem is with us all, never mind religious, secular or religious. Look, have things got greatly better since we chucked religion out of politics? Is there less unkindness, less cruelty, less insouciance about the poor? Do we just not just retire to our comfortable homes and say, I don't want to see this news about that earthquake or this particular catastrophe here? The Muslim scholar in Lebanon in the 1980s accused the West of maintaining an arrogant silence in face of the third world. So I think the problem is with all of us. We are all violent people. We're all deeply selfish people. We love to hate people because it makes us feel good. I call my book on compassion 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life because we are addicted to our pet hatreds. We don't know what we'd do without them. We depend upon them for our sense of self.